Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Cindy, and I am a program officer at the Japan Foundation Toronto. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I won't be here for long. I just wanted to say, thank you for joining us, and that there will be a Q&A session after the talk. So if you have any questions, please leave your questions in the comments section, and we will do our best to get to all of them. Without further ado, here is the Executive Director of the Japan Foundation Toronto to give an introduction to tonight's speakers.
Good evening from Toronto, everyone. 皆様、こんばんは. My name is Yuko Shimizu, and I'm the Executive Director of the Japan Foundation Toronto. Welcome to the last of our ongoing online series on Japanese to English translation. In past installments, we have looked into translating manga and genre fiction. Today, our guests will take us on a journey to the imaginative world of children's literature and young adult literature. They will discuss the challenges of translating for a young English-speaking audience. How are specific books chosen for translation? How do translators break down difficult ideas without using footnotes? I look forward to finding out the answers to these questions alongside you. With us today are Cathy Hirano and Avery Udagawa. Ms. Hirano has been a professional translator for almost 30 years. Her books have won several honors, including multiple Batchelder Awards, which are given to the most outstanding children's books originally published in a foreign language. Her translations of Uehashi Naoko's The Beast Player and its sequel received great acclaim. Ms. Hirano joins us today all the way from Japan. This year's Batchelder Award went to Temple Alley Summer by Kashiwaba Sachiko, and we are delighted to have its translator, Ms. Avery Fischer Udagawa, join us from Thailand. Ms. Udagawa's translated short stories have appeared in many publications, including Kyoto Journal, Words Without Borders, and the Best Asian Short Stories 2018. Moderating today's conversation is Emmy-nominated and Webby Award-winning illustrator and filmmaker, Mr. Jeff Chiba Stearns. Mr. Stearns' 20 years of experience as an animator gives him a unique perspective on appealing to younger audiences. In recent years, he has written and illustrated his own children's books, including his 2021 graphic novel, On Being Yukiko. Together with Ms. Hirano and Ms. Udagawa, our panel today offers a wide range of perspectives on publishing and translating children's literature in Japan and in North America. Thank you again for having tuned in to our Parallel World series. I hope you enjoyed listening to translators of different genres discuss the secret of their trade. Please enjoy today's talk, and I hope you will join us for further events in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shimizu. And now the stars that you're waiting for. I'll leave you to it.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Chiba Stearns. I am a Vancouver-based filmmaker, producer, animator, and illustrator, and author. And like most people these days, I host a podcast. So I'll be your host for this session, Parallel Worlds, Translating for Young Minds, presented by the Japan Foundation. I myself self-identify as a mixed Japanese-Canadian, and early on, I always had a fascination with Japanese pop culture, from anime to manga. It inspired my own sort of hybrid style of animation, which I've dubbed as Japanimation, which is kind of a blend of North American and Japanese cartoon styles. So as mentioned earlier, on top of writing some kids' books and illustrating kids' books, I just finished my first graphic novel, On Being Yukiko, and it features a 12-year-old Japanese Canadian girl who's Gosei, fifth generation, And she identifies as quarter Japanese. And in the book, she discovers a pride for her Japanese heritage through her Japanese Canadian family's story, their history immigrating to Canada and enduring hardships like the Japanese Canadian internment. So because of that, we've actually had a lot of requests to translate the book to Japanese, to bring the book to Japanese audiences, because a lot of people really want to sort of tell the story and have it accessible to a wider audience like those in Japan. But the problem is I don't speak Japanese. I'm Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese Canadian. I had no opportunity to learn Japanese growing up. And this has always sort of been a conflicting process for me, having Japanese ancestry, but feeling disconnected to my Japanese roots because I can't understand the language. So luckily, though, we have found a translator and a couple, Fumi and Teiko, tour guy from Whitehorse, Yukon, who are actually helping to translate on Being Yukiko to Japanese, which has been a very humbling experience for me, because I have no idea when I get the translations how they'll fit in the bubbles because I can't read Japanese. So luckily, Fumi has taken it upon himself to actually lay out the, I can show you here, this is neat. I just got these in yesterday, and Fumi has actually put the Japanese translations into the bubbles for me, which is fantastic because now I can actually kind of understand how it's supposed to work. So it's a very, it's been a very interesting process for me, as you can kind of see how just actually neat to see the book being translated to a different language. And it's actually really quite exciting. So I also know it's taken him and his wife months. They're a husband and wife team, and they're leaders in the Japanese Canadian community as well. But it's taken a long, long time. And knowing that, I started to realize just how big of a job translating anything can be. Especially as a kid, I used to watch a lot of Japanese animation, and I didn't realize that titles like Kimba the White Lion or Astro Boy had different titles in Japan. And you start to sort of think, what else is lost in translation? So I guess with the explosion of popularity of Japanese pop culture, manga, anime, and literature, I'm very curious how these materials are translated from Japanese to a North American audience. What words and titles are being changed to be more appealing to an English-speaking audience, and how do translators honor the original source material? So for this discussion, we'll talk about the challenges translators face when adapting Japanese young adult literature, and what it takes to accurately adapt the story for English-speaking audiences, understanding that translators hold an extreme amount of power, and that sometimes a bad translation can change the entire context of a work. How's that? Hey, so without further ado, I want to jump right into this conversation because we have a lot to cover, and I know that people tuning in probably have a lot of questions as well. So I'll save those questions till the end. We'll have a 50-minute Q&A. So as you listen through, think of your own questions, and you can, I think, present those in a chat. But I want to welcome our professional translators, Avery and Cathy, today to our discussion. How are you both?
Good.
Fine,
Nervous.
Oh, there's nothing to be nervous of. We'll get right into it. So first off, I just want to introduce your books. I had the great pleasure of reading through The Beast Player by, it was translated by Cathy. And Temple Alley, I'm looking at it backwards because I'm looking at the screen and looking at this. Temple Alley Summer, which Avery had translated recently. So these are the two most recent books I'm assuming that you've translated with Children's Lit. And as you can see, they're not thin books. This is, I'm holding probably an unsurmountable amount of work, I guess, that it takes to translate this. So maybe let's get right into it. Right off the start, thinking of this, maybe a nice easy question. What led you on your path, I guess, to translating literature? And I guess more specifically, what led you into an interest, I guess, translating YA literature from Japanese to English? Let's start there. Question for both of you. Avery or Cathy, whoever wants to go first.
Cathy, I nominate you.
I was going to say Avery. Okay. What got me into it was a friend from university who worked for a Japanese publishing company called Fukutaka Shoten, which specialized in children's and young adult literature. She was specializing in that section. And she approached me and first asked me to review books in English to see if they would be good to publish in Japanese. And then she started to ask me to translate books from Japanese into English. So that's what got me started. Yeah. The
Nice.
connection.
Avery?
Yeah, I would say that connections got me started too. I had been an English major who added Japanese in college and then studied in Japan for a few years and knew that I wanted to use my languages in some way and tried different kinds of translation and discovered that I enjoyed children's literature. I was also getting ready to start a family at the time, and I kind of wanted my personal and work lives to connect. So that figured in as well.
Nice. Yeah, and I find that that's sort of why I got into doing kids books as well too, because I started a family as well. I've got a young 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, so I feel like it was a good transition in my life to kind of go in that direction. Leading me to the next sort of like question is, do you kind of have a vested sort of interest in youth or Japanese pop culture? And if so, does this kind of help you with translating young adult material, especially because there's a lot of pop cultural reference in these books, I guess? You find that, does it help? Do you know much about Japanese, I guess, pop culture in that sense, or youth culture?
I think I have a vested interest in young readers in the Anglosphere exploring their world from an early age. I really think that that's necessary and fun, and have been surprised, especially in my early years as a translator, to see how little is published in translation for young readers. And I think that in this very small world we live in, very interconnected, these books are really enjoyable and also useful in helping kids explore the world that they're going to steward very soon. So I feel like that's where my passion comes from. Japanese pop culture is maybe not my area of expertise, but fortunately we have the internet.
Yeah, I actually feel exactly the same way. I've never thought about having a vested interest in anything. I just really love young people. I love, I think from my own experience as a child, for me, books were like a refuge from school, which sometimes seemed like a very cruel and cold world in some ways, and also very sort of narrow. And going into a book led me into another world and allowed me to experience life from another perspective. And when I came to Japan, it was so different culturally from my, from what I had grown up with, that was like a real life experience where my mind just, was almost forced open in some ways. I just came to see the world in a different way. So translating a book that's been written by someone from this culture, from their perspective and experience, into English or any other language allows young people whose minds are really inquisitive and they want to explore. It just opens this door into something that they couldn't experience unless they came to Japan,
Right.
But through a book, they actually can. So yeah, that's really what inspires me and keeps me going.
Nice. Yeah, let's know more about the process, I guess, of translating, and then just even the initial steps that it takes to kind of like go through that process. And I guess one of those is, you're translating a work, creative work. And I'm always curious, there's the author who wrote the work. Do you ever get a chance to kind of work with the author, talk with the author to kind of maybe discuss like maintaining the artistic integrity of the story, or how you might specifically translate, some of like even the title to English, right? Because that, as I was mentioning before, sometimes, the titles are completely different in North America than they may be in Japan. I guess the biggest question there is, how much do you get to work with the author, even at all? Or is it really just working with the publisher or the editor? Or is it vary?
I'll jump in here, Cathy.
Yeah, okay, you go
I
ahead.
want to hear from you about working with Ohashi-san and Yumoto-san and so on. Different projects get born in different ways, and that can affect how much access the translator has to the author. I have been fortunate with Temple Alley Summer and other works by Sachiko Kashiwaba to be in connection with her. I was first introduced back when working on a short story for an anthology called Tomo, Friendship Through Fiction, an anthology of Japan teen stories. I did a YA story of hers for that. And it's been lovely to be in touch with her in the 10 years or so since, not just because she can answer questions about specifics to do with her writing, which is extremely helpful and can help prevent mistakes, but also just to get a sense of the background and the interests and the values and the worldview that power everything she puts into the world. And that helps me, I think, maybe at a more subconscious level when I'm translating her work.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've also been very, very fortunate. The 3 young adult writers who wrote for the young adult audience were, I was able to be in touch with 2 of them directly, and then with the other one, I was able to be in touch with her editor. And I think it makes a huge difference to the end result. I mean, you've been working with Fumi, so you will know, you'll be able to say why you chose a certain word. When I do a translation, I do try and come to a very polished version before I approach the author. But at the end, after I've asked all my Japanese contacts, what do you think this word means in this context? What is she trying to get across here? What's the image that pops into your mind when you read this paragraph? At the very end, there are things that, Japanese readers that I talk to just don't know. It could be taken this way or it could be taken another way. And those are the questions that I then ask the author. And like Avery said, it's sort of, it gives me immense respect for the author and for their choice of words. I'm trying to get across their message, not my message. So I really want it to be true to what they intended. And I'm very grateful for the work that the authors were willing to put in, because I know for many authors, often the books are very old. It's like 10 years or more. They don't even remember what they wrote, and it's a lot of work to talk to the translator about it. So yeah, those that have put in the work, those are the books that won awards in, the English publishing world.
Right. That's a good sort of segue into the next question I have then is, what is the process, I guess, of translating very specific Japanese words, which might not have a literal English translation? I'm assuming this can be extremely challenging at times and can really maybe slow you down, in your process. For example, in Beast Player, there's the word washu, which I read, was kind of referencing a thick swarm of glowing insects. But I don't know, is that the literal translation, or in Avery's translation of Temple Alley Summer, dealing with elements of the story that take place at a Japanese school and sort of encountering words like yukata and yakisoba, right? Clothing and food sort of items. If, there's sort of something that's a specific reference to something very specific to Japanese culture or very regionally specific that may only be understood to maybe a Japanese audience, are you able to kind of creatively interpret these words or offer further explanations that may not be in the original story? I guess specifically, especially when it comes to younger English-speaking audiences that may not know some of these Japanese words, I guess, could you expand on maybe how that process is for you? And are you able to, kind of like add a little bit more detail where you need to?
Would you like to start, Cathy?
Okay, I'll start. First of all, washu, with Naoko Uehashi, her works are all set in a fantasy world. So she makes up her own words for a lot of the things in the novels, and washu is one of them. However, in Japanese, they use Chinese characters which have meaning, right? You can look at it and see the meaning, and then on top, she puts the pronunciation. So it would be washu. And, I can't do that in English. We don't have Chinese characters. So I used washu, and then I put an explanation afterwards. So that was what I had to do. And I talked with her, for example, there were Japanese words like ki or kehai. Kehai means you feel, you sense that there's someone there. It's like sensing a presence of something, or ki is that energy. And she uses those concepts. But when I asked her, we don't have those words in English. Could we, for example, use ki? Because it is a known word in the English language due to the martial arts and Oriental medicine. And she said no, because these are set in a they're not set in this world. So to introduce a word like that, which is associated with another culture in our language, would then bring up images of that culture. And that would change the reader's experience. And, when she said that, I was like, that was such a learning experience for me. I realized she's right. I can use these foreign words that she's made up, but to use a word that's been imported recently from another culture in her works would actually change the reader's experience. So yeah, I have to be with her works very careful. And concerning, other settings, I think Avery will have good examples from her recent novel, Temple Alley. So you go ahead on that one. A book in a Japanese setting.
Right. So both Cathy and I have worked on novels that are set at least partly in school. In the book publishing world, there's this category middle grade. It's kind of the one for slightly younger readers than teens, like 8 to 12 years old. It's not used in common parlance quite as much, but Temple Alley Summer is an example of a middle grade book. And so is The Friends by Kazumi Yumoto, which Cathy translated. And middle grade books will often be set partly in school because 8 to 12-year-olds' lives usually involve school. And school is not the same everywhere. It looks and feels very different country to country. And Japanese school, like school in so many other places, has these idiosyncrasies. And so, and often the function of the school setting in the original is to start the reader out in a familiar, predictable place. And you want to offer that experience to the reader of the English too. You don't want to start them out with all these specifics about Japanese school that make them feel like, oh my gosh, this is a totally new world that I have to learn. And it's a lot of setup and, I'm just going to stop here. That you don't want to do that. And so in terms of which terms you can keep in and use and so on, it's really a balancing act. I always want to share as much of the Japanese culture as possible, but I also want to offer that experience of familiarity. And so what I'll do is generally translate or explain stealthily aspects that are essential to understanding the story, to staying with the flow. And others may have to be receive a little less emphasis. Sometimes the reader can be helped along by illustrations too. Middle grade and picture books will have maybe more interior illustrations. And so I don't have to state that in this conference room, the desks are pushed together rather than there being a long conference room table. I can let the illustrations do some of that work for me. Another example that you mentioned was the yukata, and that's not for school. That's to do with the summer festival that happens in the book. And there were illustrations by Miho Satake to show a yukata for anyone who saw that in the text and might have had questions. So it's nice when we get help from the illustrator that way.
Yeah, that's a question I have actually later about translating children's picture books in specific. But I guess in essence, as a follow-up question, what are some things that are translated, changed, or lost when it comes to children's literature? Like, are there specific practices or cultural references, found in the original book that may be acceptable in Japan, but might not pass in another country? And sort of, does children's literature place greater concern over what content can be or should not be translated?
I don't know if I've run into anything in the books I've done that would be considered taboo in English. Have you, Cathy? This happens to
Um,
others, I know.
yeah, with Yumoto Kazumi's book, The Friends, there was one place where, there's an expletive, is that what you call it? In Japanese, they're very, they're things like snot or, they're not that offensive, but children do say them, right? So in one place, I think it was in that book, I think I used the word damn. And the editor very kindly pointed out that um, it wouldn't be read in the schools, put it that way. It would not make, it would limit how much the book could be read in the United States if I used that word. I don't know if that's true today because that was a few decades ago, but that was a good learning experience for me. And when I was listening to your question, I was thinking that's actually something I do a lot of work with the editor. So I will translate as closely to the Japanese as possible, but I will often leave comments because I know there's certain concepts that are very Japanese, like the whole school year thing that Avery was discussing. I mean, it starts in April. They go to cram school and all of these aspects that aren't so familiar. I flag them and I put in quite a bit of explanation so that the editor doesn't just edit it out, that she realizes it's an important aspect. And then we consult together. And I often also ask the author then, would it be okay to adjust it in this way so that, someone in a North American setting would find it more familiar, or not more familiar, but would be able to picture it. Yeah.
And I guess that kind of leads me to sort of thinking too that do translators, I guess, have a style? Are you being chosen because you have a particular style, or you can interpret things creatively that maybe some other translators may not? I guess, is there a level of creativity to translation in your mind, or are you kind of just supposed to stick to the script? I don't know. Like, how much freedom do you have, I guess, to really express the story?
I might start out here.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Jump in anytime. I would say that translation is an artistic endeavor, and that a translator must have an interpretation and a subjective experience of the text in order to convey that to another person. But we also care a lot about fidelity. I think, as a kind of an analogy for what we're doing, we live in an age of translation apps and things, and I think it's therefore easy for folks to think that what we do is kind of mechanical. We're just like human apps or something. There's a right answer for every line. But I would say that it's more like a musician performing a piece composed by someone else. You learn that piece, you learn every note, you then consider, how can I perform this so that it moves listeners? Because what we put together ultimately has to sit, the books have to sit on the shelf next to material originally written in English. And it has to be just as moving and just as compelling, just as entertaining as those books. Right. So there is definitely a sense in which we're very concerned about fidelity or accuracy in terms of just conveying the nuts and bolts, the meaning. But then we do have to be concerned about the art of it as well. Yeah. How do I do, Cathy? Would you concur?
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that analogy. It rings true for me. And I was thinking, that a translator is both an avid reader, like loves especially of children's and young adult literature. Okay, I'm not talking about bread and butter, but you have to love that work, and you read it with an intensity that you probably don't read other books. By the time I finished a translation, I've read it 10 times, and I'm even more in love with that book. So as Avery said, it's trying to reproduce that experience in a different language of what you experienced when you read it in the original. But then at the same time, there's a need for a real humility and a willingness to learn from the author's voice in there. Like I need a lot of creativity to reproduce the experience, but I don't want to rewrite the book, so I have to be a really good writer, but not of my own original work. It's the writers, it's not mine, it's the writers, and having that sort of respect. And yeah, it's a real interesting balance, I think.
Wow. And that's interesting to me as well too, to think of, what are some of the key points of consideration, I guess, when translating kids books or, young adult literature. What do you try to focus on when working with children's books or young adult literature as opposed to maybe books for adults? Could you expand on sort of how that, I guess, push and pull might be for you, and trying to make sure that for young adult readers, there might be a higher level of comprehension, I guess, of certain elements of the story?
You want to go, Avery?
I'll start, but yeah, again, please chime in.
Mm-hmm.
Cathy has done more books for adults than I have, including this is outside of literature per se, but the tidying up books by Marie Kondo. So she definitely has lots of experience in both. But for children's, I would throw in there that so for those not familiar with the maybe quote unquote usual process, for children in, say, Canada or the United States to receive a book in translation, to find it in their library or bookstore, it's kind of like food from overseas. It has to be cooked up for them in their country for that to reach them. A publisher in the country will acquire the rights to publish the book in English and will hire the translator and work with them to put the book out. And that publisher is, again, thinking about the books in that country that it will sit next to on the shelf, thinking about the different categories that booksellers and librarians and parents are looking at when they acquire books. And sometimes those categories are not the same in the culture that the books come from. So that can lead to some different things that we have to do. Just to give one example, when I worked on a middle grade historical novel called J-Boys, Kazuo's World, Tokyo, 1965 by Shogo Oketani, it features a fourth grader in the English edition, but originally the main character was younger. He was 8 years old, and we changed him to 9 because we learned that in the United States, kids around that age will want to read up or to read about children slightly older than themselves. I have not had this verified by a large sample of children per se, but that was what we did to sort of try and meet the market where it was. And fortunately that change didn't take away, I felt, from the spirit of the book at all. So that's one thing we did. That book actually was written and is published in Japan as an adult book. It has a grade school main character, and in Japan you can do that more often than you can in the States. So again, these categories.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's actually my experience as well. The authors that I've translated, none of them wrote specifically for children or young adults. They write the book they really wanted to read. I think they may have a certain audience in mind, but it's not as clearly defined in Japan. So Uehashi Nahoko's The Beast Player author, her readership is from about age 8 to over 80. People in their 80s and 90s read and love her works. And I remember with the first work of hers that I translated, Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit. The protagonist is 30. Yes, Moribito. She, we were told, and she was even told in Japan, but she was also told by the English publishers that you can't have a 30-year-old as the protagonist of a young adult novel or a novel for children, right?
Right.
And she actually said, okay, fine, then you don't have to publish it. It was like, and I thought, that is so true. Like I read the book, and it's like, I felt like I understood where that way of thinking was coming from, because they have to sell the book. And if you find out the person is 30 years old on the first page, maybe you won't read the rest of it. And particularly the people who won't read the rest of it are the people who might be reviewing it for young people, because they'll say, oh no, the protagonist is too old. But I don't think any child would read that book and be upset by her being 30 years old. They are intelligent, and they're curious, and they're very imaginative. So I think it would be really cool, because she's not just 30 years old, she's this incredible warrior. So we talked with the author and the editor. There was a lot of back and forth, and the solution was to introduce her age later in the book. So that was the way we got beyond there was the knowledge that it might not get read and put into the bookstores if the age came too soon, but that it was okay to put the age later in the book was the solution. Yeah. So yes, I guess the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
But there's ways of getting around things, I guess, if
Sure.
you consult together.
Yeah, and I think about all the things that we're watching, and as a filmmaker, I watch a lot of shows that, especially Korean shows now, are very popular, and we actually have to trust a lot of this translation, that we're getting the right context of things, and there's we sometimes forget that there are people behind the scenes who are doing all that work, and there's a lot of pressure on that. In thinking about that, with translating something like Beast Player, this is not a thin book. This is a good book. What is the process? Like, how long does it take you? Because I could just imagine, like, we spent a lot of time with Fumi and his wife to kind of like translate, on Being Yukiko, and it's taken a long time. And it's a graphic novel of 56 pages, and really there's not tons of dialogue, but man, to like this.
Yeah.
And even, with, Temple Alley Summer, this is still a considerable amount of translation you have to do. How long is it taking you? Like months, years? I don't know. Like how does one even start to begin that process, I guess?
Yeah, I'll start, and Avery, you can add. I think one of the things to be aware of is that many people, at least going from Japanese to English, who are translating children's and young adult literature, are not getting paid for it until perhaps it's published, and even so, they're not going to be paid very much. So all of the books not all of them, most of the books I translated, they didn't know if they would have a publisher or not. And so they were translated to introduce the book and hopefully get a publisher. Even when they did have a publisher, I knew that I wouldn't be making very much money from it, because it's hard for publishers to publish and sell children's books. And then if it's a translation, they're taking a big risk, and it's an extra cost. So I need to put food on the table, which means that I also need to translate work, commercial translation, for which I'll get paid properly so that I can afford to translate children's and young adult literature. So for The Beast Player, I started in 2012, and I finally finished, I think, in 2017.
Wow.
That's 5 years. It was actually 2 books, 2 volumes. And it was published as 1 book, but it took that long. Thank you, Avery. Thank you so
Avery,
much.
you've got all the books.
Yeah, she's
wow,
so wonderful.
Yeah.
Anyway, it came out in 2019 in England, or 2018. I can't remember now. And then in the States, it came out a year later. But they wanted to publish the next volume right away, because if you've got a sequel, which, yes, thank you for showing it, The Beast Warrior. If you've got a sequel, you need to get it out quickly. And so I did that in 1 year, which meant that I curtailed a lot of my commercial translations so that I could get it done on time.
Wow.
And that was really hard to get that, because it also was 2 volumes. It was actually 2 books in one.
Right. And Avery, I know that you're also a publisher. Is that correct? Or
no, maybe you're referring to the fact that I proposed this for publication as opposed to commission.
Yeah, I guess that would be a good question. Then how are titles pitched, I guess, or how, because Cathy kind of touched on it. Like, I didn't know that aspect of translation, that you're kind of doing this until it gets picked up by a publisher. Yeah, can you expand on your experiences with that process as well?
Sure. So I mentioned that generally speaking, if it's a translation into English, an English language publisher will acquire the rights and publish it. Mm-hmm. But for that publisher to make that decision, to decide to invest money in a book from overseas, even if it has done well overseas, they need to know what's in that book, right? It's not a simple decision to decide to publish a book. And so it helps them a lot if there is a sample translation of at least part of it, often an outline for all of it. And if it is an author who is essentially making their English language debut, no one has heard of this person, they might want to see the whole thing in English before they decide, because they want to know if it, if the ending lives up to the beginning and all those things. And those, the translators, myself just starting out, I was willing to invest the time to do a full translation of Temple Alley Summer from the Japanese, quote unquote, on spec, without anyone paying me, because I believed in the book and wanted to show it to publishers. It did take me years because I wasn't getting paid for that. But it helped when the time came for an acquisitions decision to be made, because they could see the whole thing. After that book came out and did well, the same publisher then commissioned me to do another book by the same author, which I'm working on now. And I didn't even have to do a sample translation. That work has an anime film based on it that recently came out, and there were some other factors. Anime films have played a role in, I think, some of the decisions around your titles too, Cathy.
Yes, yeah.
But so for the first book that I pitched, no payment for years, took a long time, had to do it on my own dime initially. The second book, I've received a little bit of money to help pay for the process of getting it done, and then I'll receive a bit more later. So it kind of depends on how known of a quantity the author is and the translator is. But yeah, that process of being able to show an English language publisher what they're buying, when most publishers in the English field don't read the source language, is an area where a lot of translators sort of get mired in this, in situations with poor working conditions, and that's a struggle.
Yeah, I could imagine that it's, it's a labor of love, and there's a love for the craft, and you guys are definitely showing that, you have a passion for this craft. So I guess looking at that, kind of wrapping up our portion of the talk, what are some of the most enjoyable aspects, I guess, of translating for you? Like, it sounds like there's a passion, or else you wouldn't be doing this on spec, or, like, there has to be something that drives you to really, engage in this, right? This process. And what is that for you? What is the most enjoyable aspect, I guess, of translating that you feel in your heart?
For me, I think it's the response of the reader. So when a book that I've translated has been published and somebody reads it and they fall in love with it, and maybe even through that they then fall in love with Japan and want to know more, I mean, that just fills my heart with joy. It makes me so happy. It's all worth doing. Even one person feeling that way about the book makes it all worth doing.
What she said.
Okay, yes, that was very eloquent, Cathy. Thank you. That makes me want to learn Japanese now. but that will come, I'm sure, with time. So let's see. We're transitioning to the Q&A. I'm just waiting maybe for some questions from the audience to come through. Here's a question from Stephen C. As anime and Japanese culture have become more mainstream in North America, has it become any easier to directly translate specific Japanese cultural quirks?
Yes. Absolutely yes. Yeah, I was thinking back to my first book, which I translated, and I even translated the word sake as rice wine, because at that time, it's about 30 years ago, it wasn't common knowledge to a lot of people that there was such a thing as sake. So yes, it does make a big difference.
Anything that increases background knowledge, right? That means that we can leave more in and quote unquote lose less in the process of trying to get the story across. Yeah,
that would help, wouldn't it? I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. Jocelyn Allen. Oh, we met Jocelyn earlier tonight. Besides doing translations on spec, do you do readers' reports on books for publishers? Question. Or do you have other ways of pitching a book to a publisher besides a spec translation?
I have only done one reader's report. I think you've done many more than I have, Cathy. Would that be accurate?
I have, yes. I'll read a book and, write a summary. So I often do that for the Japanese publisher. I'll read the book, write a summary, and then they take that to English publishers. And if the English publisher is interested, they'll ask for a sample translation. I think we talked before about sample translations, and one of the things I didn't realize that shocked me later is that not only do they look at my sample translation, they then also get sample translations from other translators. So I might not be able to translate the book, which, is probably a good thing, but I didn't realize it when I was doing samples.
I think that happens maybe in some cases, not all, depends on the publisher. But yeah, that is a risk when pitching a translation, is the publisher could fall in love with it, but still be within their rights to hire a different translator.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Jocelyn. That was another one there. Jocelyn, we should mention too, is also a celebrated translator in her own right as well. So these are great questions, Jocelyn. And how do you choose which projects to put all that unpaid work into in the hopes that it gets picked up by a publisher? There's the secret, revealing the secrets. Any thoughts on that from either of you two?
What do you think, Avery?
Oh gosh, I guess I'm attempting to move in my work from doing less unpaid work to more paid work. I'm sorry. Did you get what I meant there? I would like to be paid more now that I am no longer just starting out.
Right.
And I think it's kind of similar to what novelists or illustrators go through. At the beginning, or actors or musicians, right? At the beginning, you have to put yourself out there a little bit so that people know you do good work. And then as you become more of a known quantity, you can negotiate for better conditions. And I certainly try to do that, not only because I have children and need to save for their education and things, but also because I would like conditions for the field as a whole to improve over time for colleagues.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a very good point. How do I choose projects would be whether I fall in love with the book enough that it's worth it. And like Avery, thanks to Avery and other translators in the field, I have learned that I need to actually negotiate once it does get picked up by a publisher, that I really should be, not for my own sake, but also for the sake of the field itself, be consulting with them about getting copyright to the translation, about getting adequate payment, and how it can be possible in a way that's fair for everyone, not, just me.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, so because we're on the business end of things, do you have rights to royalties, or if like you sell 1 million books in North America, does that reflect as a bonus? Are you getting like is there any of that in the translation world, I guess, or can you negotiate that in I guess?
Up until now, I think, and Avery, you can correct me, my understanding is that legally the translator actually does have rights to the copyright. And I don't know about royalties. You'd have to probably negotiate that, but you actually have copyright. But all of the contracts that I had been doing until I understood that automatically took the copyright away.
Oh.
It was just automatic, and it was always considered a work for hire. And I mean, these books actually don't make tons of money, so you probably wouldn't get a lot back anyway, but still, just sort of the principle of it, when I realized that's actually what is happening, it made me think, is that really okay? And there are now actually, the publishers I work with, they upfront, right in their contract, give copyright and make sure that the translator's name is on the cover and it's clear who translated it. But that wasn't the case in the past, right, Avery?
Right. My sense is that over time, the recognition has been growing that translators are performing a service that is creative. If you give the Beast Kemono no Soja to 5 different translators, they will translate it 5 different ways, all of which are faithful, but they're different performances of it or different renderings of it. So people have gradually come to realize that it's a creative task, and also that we are freelancing. We're not on the payroll of a publisher, and therefore, just like writers and illustrators, we're not the same as the writer by any means. We'd be the first to tell you that. We're not the same as the illustrator, but we are offering a creative service as independent contractors, and people in that position need to retain copyright and be credited and compensated. There are, in the negotiation process, different translators need different things, and some might be willing to stick with a different fee structure, but generally I go for, again, something like what a novelist might go for, a contract involving an advance and royalties, so that I have a stake in the success of the book going forward.
I guess following up with that then is, if one of these books gets picked up in North America to become a movie, and that becomes a big thing, how does that factor into the translation? Because, for most of these producers, they don't speak Japanese. They're reading the English translation and adapting it from that. There must be some... Does that happen to either of you in that regard? Or do you know what would happen in that process if you would get some kind of a royalty from that or a stake in that? Or because if you have copyright, that I assume would become part of the negotiation process with that, wouldn't it?
Exactly. That's actually why it's better to retain copyright, because if it's even made into an ebook or made into some other form of publication or into a movie, then you actually do have some right to be recognized and compensated at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's good to know. I think we have a couple more questions coming in. Can someone help me with the Japanese, please? Because I feel so terrible that I have never learned the language. The name.
Morinobu Yoshida.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that Japanese YA fiction has potential to reach to adult audience in North America, like in Japan?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Adults,
absolutely.
go out and read these books. They're wonderful. And these too, the Moribito books, for sure. As an adult, I read and reread them and love them. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's true even for English, young adult literature written in English originally. A lot of adults read.
Yeah.
Literature written that is supposedly marketed for the teenager, young adult market, but some of it is so good. It's like they're classics and they're ageless. They're not related to people's age, I think.
Right. I guess part of it too, like with the translation of the titles, do you have some I guess how faithfully translated are a lot of titles these days? Because I was mentioning that with the anime I would watch in the 80s, it had nothing even close to what it was, right? In Japan. Is that, I guess, changed, with the titles that you are translating, I guess, to some...
I trust the English publisher.
Mm.
So I really do. They know their readership. They know the market. So they will, the Japanese author might suggest something. I usually translate the title and in consultation with the author. But I really, I think with the Beast Player and the Beast Warrior, Nahoku Uehashi actually had a very clear idea of what she wanted. But if the author doesn't, then I would tend to trust the publisher myself. I don't know. What about you, Avery?
It depends. The next work by Sachiko Kashiwaba that I'm working on is Misaki no Mayoiga, which has come out as an animated movie with the English title, The House of the Lost on the Cape, which I don't know. It's, that got into my brain from, the internet and such so early that I'm not sure what I would have done with the title before having that one suggested, but I'm going to be interested to see if we need to stick with that because that was what was put on the anime and they want people to make the connection or not. I'm not sure what we'll do there. The Beast Player was also like that, and perhaps wasn't there also already an animated version? Maybe
there
not
wasn't
a movie.
An animated version, yeah.
Oh.
But I don't. I think the English title may have come from the book. Yeah.
Great. I guess I just want to, oh, here we go. We got last question. What advice do you have for those who want to get into translating Japanese to English literature? There you go. This is your chance to inspire many people to follow in your footsteps.
Join and volunteer in relevant professional organizations and start with some short fiction.
Good advice.
Yeah, and be a good writer in the target language. So if you want to go into English, make sure you're a really good writer in English, even more than your Japanese language. Your English language is going to be important.
Nice. Well, that's great. I want to give you guys a chance to plug anything that you've been working on, any social media handles you want people to follow you with. What's the next big project, or can you talk about it? Is there anything that you want to plug right now? This is your shot. You can shout it out to our lovely audience watching at home.
Go for it, Avery.
I just mentioned I was translating The House of the Lost on the Cape, but this is for publication next year. If anyone is interested in reading a little more Sachiko Kashiwaba right now, you could go to Words Without Borders. The website has a short story of hers that is set in kind of a European-inspired fantasy world. She read very widely as a child and writes in all kinds of different traditions and kind of DJ mixes them sometimes. It's fascinating. So there's a story called First Claw over there. And then there's also a story in this anthology called A Tapestry of Colors, Stories from Asia, that has a story called Mirror, Mirror, as in the Snow White line, mirror, mirror on the wall. It's set in regional Japan, and it's about a boy's relationship with his father, and it involves knitting.
Nice. Cathy, anything exciting?
Yes, I do want to introduce this book. Anne's Cradle. It's not a young adult literature book, but it's about a woman named Hanako Muraoka who translated Anne of Green Gables during World War II at the risk of her life. And if you want to learn what it was like to be a woman in Japan from the early 1900s through the Second World War, how children's literature in Japan, the translation of it developed in Japan, this is fascinating. It's such an amazing history. And it's published by Nimbus in Nova Scotia. And then this book is coming out. It's not young adult literature, it's a children's book. Free Kid to a Good Home by Hiroshi Ito, who's a very well-known children's author and illustrator in Japan. It's very funny about a little girl who's had enough of having a newborn baby brother, leaves home to find a better family, and her adventures. It's very well done.
That's great. And I guess that's a great segue to say too that for people watching, all of Cathy, Avery, and actually some of my work now can be found in the Japan Foundation Toronto's library collection. And so you have the ability to, they also have ebooks available to borrow for anyone living in Canada with a JFT library card. Sorry, it's only available in Canada. But they can sign up for a JFL library card by going to the website jftor.org. I think that was running along the bottom there. There is also a post-event questionnaire that you can fill out as feedback. You will receive help for the Japan Foundation to better plan future events. There will be a link and QR code leading to the questionnaire in an email sent in the next day for registered participants. Also, we should note that this is the last Parallel Worlds event. So I hope that those of you who have caught all of them have enjoyed the events. We want to thank everybody who tuned in over the course of the last year. And basically, I think that kind of wraps everything up. You can go to Meditating Bunny if you want to check out my stuff. And other than that, I just want to sincerely thank the both of you, Avery and Cathy, so much for giving us an hour of your time to impart such great words of wisdom in the world of translation. I myself I feel like I have formed a much greater appreciation for the work that you do, because I think a lot of times the translator doesn't always get the credit they should for the immense amount of work that goes into translating anything, really, from films to television to books and literature. So thank you so much for being part of this, and hopefully you have inspired some of out there to follow in your footsteps, and to think about putting to use the ability to be able to speak multiple languages and translate. I myself am inspired now to want to actually put a little more effort into maybe learning another language. So thank you so much. And I think with that, I think we might have wrapped. So any last parting words? Are we good?
A big thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Right. So, yes. Thank you to the Japan Foundation, to Cindy, all the organizers who helped put this event on. These events are very culturally enriching. And I think, like I said, the more we can talk about these things, the more we can inspire and engage audiences. So thank you so much. And to everyone who joined in, have a wonderful evening, a great morning, a great day, a great afternoon, and we will hopefully see you down the road.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.